So this is my poem, Pride in Education. Education is at the heart of us. It influences everything we do. It makes us fearful and narrow-minded, or open, honest, and true. Education can eradicate hatred by opening up our mind to the diversity of the human race. Encourage us to be kind. Education can give us confidence to be who we are without fear, to value our contribution to society as non-binary, trans, or queer. Education is the lever that can ease prejudice away by teaching respect and acceptance of being lesbian, bisexual, or gay. Education encourages understanding of being different and yet the same, allows us to be who we're meant to be without fear or guilt or shame. So, thank you to the teachers, publishers, administrators, the parents who care, who will ensure that our children grow up informed and aware. Thank you. So I'd like now to introduce our panel, and there's going to be a short question and answer, but then we're going to move into the bar. So we're going to be around if you want to just chat to us. That would be really great. I'll just take this off now. So first of all, I'd like to introduce... I need someone to hold this for me. Laïla El-Métoui. I've known Laïla for many years, worked with her, but I should say that she is an award-winning equity educator with over 30 years' experience in education and inclusion in the public and private sector. She's passionate about social justice and is the founder of Pride in Education and Educating Out Racism. Laïla founded and chairs Proud London Councils, the Pan-London LGBTQIA staff network for local authorities. Her work has been recognised as Stonewall Lesbian Role Model of the Year and named on the Guardian Pride Power List. Her impact on the LGBTQIA community and beyond has been influential. Laïla.
Well, an introduction. Thank you, Trudy. Thank you to the Garden Cinema for hosting this event for LGBTQ plus History Month. And thank you to the people for making that movie. I thought it was a snapshot of what it was like during Section 28. Just as a show of hand, how many people were in education during Section 28? Whoa.
Oh, quite a few.
Not many. There's quite a lot of young people. So I'm just wondering how it felt. Was it something new? You heard it before? Because I deliver training in schools, colleges, and as Trudy mentioned, I started Pride in Education in March 2020 as a result of the British government cutting £4 million from the education budget, which was dedicated to anti-homophobic, anti-biphobic and anti-transphobic bullying in schools. And if I'm really honest, I thought it was just going to be a pandemic thing. And then when we got back to normal, whatever normal is, Pride in Education wouldn't need to be. But sadly, now more than ever, it is a conference that the next one is on the 20th of May, if anybody is interested, completely free. And it offers practical tools for anyone working in primary, secondary, further education or HE to embed it within their curriculum, start a rainbow club. This year, for the second time, I'm a judge on the Queer Student Awards. If you work in education, check it out, QSA, Queer Student Award. And the last thing I want to say is if anyone is doing outstanding work in education, the call for contributions for Pride in Education is open, closes on the 19th of March. It's online, and I invite you all to go to prideineducation.co.uk.
Great. So you can go and come along and have a chat with her in the bar later if she's piqued your interest. But now let's move on to Hélène Sifre, who is a BAFTA and BIFA nominated film producer who has produced several award-winning short films in Paris and London. But Blue Jean is her first full-length feature film. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I don't know if you noticed, but this film was financed by BBC Film and the BFI. And it was written and directed with Georgie Oakley. Since premiering at the Venice Film Festival in 2022, where it won the Audience Award, Blue Jeans has been nominated for 13 and winning 4 BIFA awards. Hélène went on to be nominated for Outstanding British Debut by a Producer at the 2023 BAFTA Awards. Congratulations. So, actually, I'm sure everyone wants to know, how did this film come about? Because I'm sure that for every teacher who's here, there would have been really a resonance to the actual character, and I hear that that character was based on an actual real person.
Yeah, it was. So the origin of the project was about 5 years ago when Georgia, the writer director of the film, was born in '88. So she grew up during the years. She went to school until 2006. And Section 28 was repealed in 2003. So she grew up during those years, but she had never heard of it. So at the time, we were working together already, and we knew we wanted to make our first feature together, and we knew we wanted to make it on LGBT issues. And so she started looking into the history of LGBT issues in the UK, and that's when she came across an article, because that was 2018, so that was 30 years since the 30-year anniversary of when Section 28 was voted in. So she found this article on the lesbians who abseiled down the House of Lords, and that's how she found out about Section 28. And all of a sudden, she started digging more into it and realized
Lesbian Avengers,
yeah. She realized the huge impact it had on her life, even though she'd never heard of it. And so that was really the start of the story. And straight away, we knew we wanted to make a film about a teacher, like a normal person, a day-to-day person, not an activist. Because we felt that the activist story had been done before in Pride and Heavy Milk and like some other films. And we could relate more to the character of a teacher who's not able and not willing to, carry the flag, but still wants to be able to live as a normal person, but isn't allowed to, because that's kind of the experience that Georgia and I had. I mean, I'd recently come out at the time, and she had also came out in her late 20s, and so we could see how people were suddenly treating us differently and putting us in a box, but we didn't necessarily want to carry our gayness in a very obvious way, and so that's why the character of a teacher for us was more relatable. and we felt like we could tell this story better probably than like the activist story. And it also felt more relevant to today in a way, because I feel like the issues around internalized homophobia and living a double life are still very much issues now, whereas obviously Section 28 has been repealed and some things have improved, but not, you know, the general attitude of society is still problematic, as I'm sure we'll talk about. But so through the early process, we did a lot of research, and we met a couple of teachers. Some of them Sarah met as well. So this isn't inspired by one in particular. It's heavily inspired by at least a couple of them that have slightly different experiences. But yeah, it's more like an amalgamation of those several people we chatted to.
Oh, thank you. And also here we have Dr. Sarah Drummond, who is a director and filmmaker. She is executive producer at LS Productions, a company whose aim is to help people tell their stories. She is currently directing a feature-length documentary on Section 28 called Don't Say Gaya, as part of her Queer Bricolage series. So what do you feel is the relevance of making a film about Section 28 now?
Yeah, thanks, Trudy. I should say I'm not the director of LS Productions, but that's okay because she's also called Sarah Drummond and we have met in real life. So I feel like I'm just going to steal all her IMDb titles.
I just promoted you.
I feel like I have to actually genuinely change my name. We've actually met in real life. It was quite funny, but the world didn't cave in. She's also a film director, but happy to be her.
No, be happy to be yourself. I think being yourself is good enough, darling.
I hope so. Thanks, Trudy. Why now? Well, I guess, much like Georgia and Georgia's experience, I'm not really into the habit of revealing my age, but I think it's important contextually to why I'm making this film. So I'm 36. I was born in 1986 and I went to school under Section 28 for the entirety of my school career. So went to school in 1991, left in 2003. And I was gay. I knew I was gay, but I felt everything that Catherine felt, everything that those children felt. I had no positive images. Everything was heteronormative in every single book, every single piece of history. There was no queer representation at all. And now that I've found out about this thing, much like Georgia, I went to a film festival and Section 28, and there was a Manchester March actually that features in Blue Jean, was shown for about 10 seconds on the screen. I remember taking the bus home. We were just round the corner at BFI. I turned to my partner Lou and said, "What was Section 28?" I was 30 years old when I asked that question. 30 years old. Yeah, it was something that had been put in place by the government to define my youth and my childhood and my education. So I was fucking pissed off. Yeah. I was really angry. So one is that through a lot of therapy, that anger is coming out, and I feel when I start talking to people who are about my age group, maybe early 40s as well, mid 40s, who have experienced this sort of vacuum of information when there was no internet. Remember that time where you had to be on time for someone? We didn't have the internet, but we were too young to remember things like AIDS. We're too young to remember any of the marches around Section 28. We're too young to remember the headlines, the vicious headlines by the right-wing press. We literally grew up in this kind of vacuum if you didn't have a political family or you didn't talk about politics. So I think it's really important. But why now? Like, why especially this year? Well, I think, Trudy, like you said in your poem, we see the same signs and signals that we saw in 1985, 86, 87, the way that the press are talking about trans people and lesbian and gay people and queer people, the way that the government are re-looking at education, cutting budgets on LGBTQ education. If you don't know what happened in the lead up to Section 28 and how it was repealed, you won't know what those signals are. And my friend Kevin, we went for dinner earlier together, Kevin and Paul. Kevin called it a kind of understanding the playbook of Section 28. Our generation, my generation, I don't believe really knows how to respond to it because we didn't even know that we had to fight back against it when we were younger. So we have to learn the playbook now so that we can rise up when the time is right, which is kind of now.
Well, it's not a question so much as a contribution, but just sort of feel it's worth pointing out that Russia, Eastern European countries, a lot of those places are now introducing laws very much on the model of Section 28. So it is something that's very relevant now. I mean, obviously there's always a danger in this country, and the government is trying to start a culture war because that's their only hope of winning the next election, as far as we can see. But it's a very live issue in a lot of other countries.
Could I just add to that? A very senior member of the Conservative Party said today that they're going to win, that their strategy for the next election should be focused on the trans debate. Just let that hang there for a second.
I mean, I wasn't there, Laila, you can probably talk more about it, but I remember Catherine, our teacher, a consultant, saying that Section 28 wasn't about homophobia. It was just about winning the election at the time. And Margaret Thatcher kind of saw, with the AIDS crisis happening, she saw like a good way in to get easy votes, and that's why she made it her kind of cause. And like gay people were kind of collateral in this.
Sue Saunders, Professor Emeritus Sue Saunders, who co-created LGBT History Month, and the theme for February is Behind the Lens, so this is absolutely perfect event for the theme, was in the Houses of Parliament a couple of weeks ago, and she rang me and she said it was 35 years to the day where they announced Clause 28 in the Houses of Parliament, and they were debating LGBT History Month, like what the actual like what is there to be debated. What I think, if you're not from our community, you need to understand the impact of queer erasure that it has on our mental health and well-being. And there's an organization called justlikeus.org who carried out a survey during the pandemic of 4,000 pupils in the UK, and the result of this report are online. 67% of LGBTQ plus pupils surveyed had thought about ending their lives, and 89% of black queer kids had a similar thought. I mean, for me, kids should be in school, learn and develop and thrive and progress. So when people say to me, oh, why do you do what you do? Because I know it saves lives, and it's really, really important that we remain vigilant, as you say. Homosexuality is punishable by death in 11 countries and criminalized in 69 countries around the world. For the straight people here, when I go on holidays, I Google LGBTQ plus and the name of the country before I even consider buying a flight or anything like that. And in America, the Don't Say Gay bill is being introduced. So it's very important that a movie like yours and like yours actually remind us of the detrimental impact that it has on people's mental health and well-being.
I also think it's really important that we... Thank you. I also think it's really important that we encourage each other, to be brave and to just not let it just wash over us, that kind of it's not the obvious stuff, it's often the very insidious stuff that our children see happening. I think it's important that we really encourage teachers and support them. So actually, could we have... there were some other people putting their hands up over there. I'm very keen to get the audience involved.
Can I just add one thing to what you were saying, Laila? When we were developing the script of Blue Jean, there was a lot of questions around the ending and what happens to Lois. And I come from a family of teachers in France, and so I have a very... French culture looks up to the job of a teacher and the role of school and all of that. And I struggled with the idea that Lois doesn't go back to school at the end, because to me it's a massive failure of the education system. And I had to realize, and that was like one of the biggest arguments we had on the script with Georgia, I had to realize that if Lois went back to school in this kind of school, it would probably lead to her, wanting to end her life and internalizing all this homophobia. And actually, the fact that she doesn't go back to school and becomes ostracized and goes to probably live with the co-op. I mean, that's kind of what we thought happens after the film ends. It is probably the best outcome for her, and it's really tragic. But I feel like that was the reality of the time. And so, yeah, I just hope that showing this film to people can just help make the school like a less toxic environment for those kids as well.
You know that this legislation, it didn't just affect schools, it affected every single state-funded like libraries, museums,
archives.
I had friends during the time who were hairdressers. I had a friend who worked at John Lewis. She managed the women's changing room, and they were terrified of people finding out they were gay because the whole social climate changed and being gay became a dirty thing and not natural, and lots of people became very, very worried that they were going to lose their jobs.
Hi, just a sort of reflection really on my experience as well. So I'm a teacher, secondary school teacher, and a few years ago I set up a pride group in my school. And I went to the head teacher and asked for some funding to kind of help set up the group, and asked if we could take part in Stonewall's programme for schools, and he basically said no, because he didn't want to be seen publicly like partnering with Stonewall. And sort of just, but the group's been really successful. We've had like 50 students come to the first session, which was really good, but just kind of made me think about the current climate and how important it is.
Thank you very much. So I grew up in Australia and in Ireland, two countries which had referenda on same-sex marriage, and in both cases, like I would meet people afterwards who like wanted a pat on the back for having voted for same-sex marriage, you know, and I find that the gentleman who earlier raised the similar like propaganda laws in Russia and I think particularly the example is Hungary. In those cases, like you see people here who are outraged by this, but without being aware of Section 28, and also who don't acknowledge like the trauma that trans people are experiencing in this country. Like it's a really like absurd environment in this country. Of how trans people are demonized and weaponized in public debate. But I think specifically like LGBT people who play along, who think that they that we aren't next, you know. And this kind of the conversion therapy bill, where trans people were excluded from trans exclusion, conversion therapy wasn't included in the bill, like. That is just Section 28 for trans people, do you know? And I think, I'm curious about your views on building alliances and encouraging people to cop the hell on, straight people and also LGBT useful idiots.
I could jump in if that's helpful. Yeah. Great points. I've got a few responses to it, really. The first thing I just wanted to say, it feels really weird to be up here having not made my film yet. It's kind of, I've done it like the weirdest way possible, which is to put myself in the public domain. So I'm going to make this film, and then now I feel immensely pressured to make it. But I will make this film, and we've got some money from a Kickstarter. But so it's really helpful coming to events like this to kind of hear what people need to hear, if that makes sense. It's almost like research for the film. So I was doing another talk last week in Edinburgh about the film, and I think 75% of the audience hadn't heard of Section 28, yet were kind of a little bit worried about what was going on now. And I think one of the things, the reason I'm making this film, the reason why I think films like Blue Jean are important, the reason that Catherine Lee, who the film is based on, has got a book out at the moment called Pretended. There was a book last year out by, I've forgotten his name now, Paul Baker. That was it. Paul Baker's done a book on Section 28 as well, which is excellent. You should go read. The more we can get the story out about what happened, is what I was saying before, the more we can be aware of those signals. But I think what's even more insidious about Section 28 and that approach by a government is that it's a state-sponsored silence. It's not even I was actually in Ireland at the time when there was abortion debates going on as well, and I remember being absolutely horrified by the propaganda that was being wheeled out. But Section 28, once the propaganda hadn't been wheeled out, it was just quietness. It was, from my experience anyway. So I think the reason to make this film, one of the things we can do to help people who are in the queer community, people who want to be good allies, members of the public, is to understand, I think, what the government is capable of doing in a very quick way, even when there are people who are protesting in their masses against it. So just understanding that, I think, is one thing.
Yes, could we have a point from here, please?
Yeah, I'm not... Oh, sorry. Gosh, that's awfully loud. I'm not sure I agree with Hélène that the issue wasn't homophobia, because I think it definitely was. But I think it really went hand in hand with... It's all right.
Sorry, no, but obviously it was homophobia.
Yeah,
there was a huge amount of homophobia at the time.
Yeah.
And people being, seeing gay people as like perverts and all of that. That's not... I expressed myself in the wrong way. I just meant it wasn't just homophobia, and I feel like the politics just used this also as a quick way in, but obviously fueled by a lot of homophobia.
Yeah, well, I would say that it was also very connected with Thatcher's economic policies, because that was really the beginning of dismantling a lot of the welfare state, a lot of the economic opportunities, which also affect our ability to come out, because if you've got no money, it's very hard, to come out. And I was a mum raising my son was 6 in 1988 with my partner at a time when lesbian mothers were quite few and far between, I have to say, not like it is today, thankfully. But the whole issue of our families being described as pretended, was really, it did worry you, because it was only 10 years since the 70s when, if you were a lesbian mum, your kids were very likely to be taken off you. If the ex-husband, for example, knew you were a lesbian, many women lost their kids. So, as a mother, it was created an environment where, you were worried. And so I think that's that whole effect on the community, as well as what was happening in schools, is an important thing to bring out, because we had a slogan, we're not pretending, the housework is real. So,
Yeah, and when we did our research, most people we spoke to actually had been completely ostracized from their family, and had to live in very poor socioeconomic conditions because of it. And they'd been ostracized from their professional life and all of that. So the version of Jean that still has a relationship with her sister, this is more based on our current experience to an extent. We did meet people who were lucky like that, but they were in the minority. We just felt like for us it was an opportunity to show a different, more nuance, and to relate it more to our own experience with our families of, you can have a family that pretends to be supportive but actually in small ways is not. But yeah, the reality is that, it was economically very hard.
So 4 years ago, I was working in a local place, a sort of summer school for kids, and I was writing poems that were about gender and also sexual stereotypes, and reading poems about, I'm gay and I'm a really happy person, and these were children from about I think 11 to 13. And there were 5 different schools. Coram Fields hosted it. And during the session, although the response was very positive, not one child came up to me and said they were gay. But at the break between each of those sessions, a child, sometimes 2 children, came up to me and they said, "I have a friend." And I felt very sad about it, that they didn't actually say, I think I'm that way inclined or anything like that. I feel why these films are really important, the film that you've made and the film that you're going to make, is that babies aren't born prejudiced and racist and homophobic. We teach them to be that. And it's teachers who have that responsibility to work with children and encourage them. And that's why it's so important that people are working on the level of education, because hopefully we can change.
And just one point on this, which I found, sorry, quite ironic, is that we got a 15 certificate for this film, which we were a bit disappointed by. We were hoping for a 12, even though, and the issue wasn't the nudity or the sex scenes or whatever. It was that dimension of dyke and homophobia. And that this could be traumatic for under 15-year-olds. So yeah, that's what I'm going to say about it.
I wanted to pick up on the person talking about conversion practices, because there's nothing therapeutic about conversion therapy, and language does matter, and that the government has been dithering on the issue. There was a so-called consultation on whether it should be banned or not, and we're still waiting to hear. Every single prime minister who comes in has a different stance, but it's still not illegal, and it's banned in Germany and in France and in other countries in Europe. So I wanted to make that point. And also another point around conversion. We are not trying to convert anyone. It's the straight community who's trying to convert us. I worked with refugees and people seeking asylum for close to 3 decades. I'm 55, so I remember all of that really clearly. And I used to teach my learners what the difference between accept and agree. Like, you don't have to agree that me being a lesbian is a good thing. You just have to accept. And to build on what you were saying earlier, it didn't just affect schools. Section 28 affected museum and archives, and you cannot be what you cannot see. And the last point I wanted to make is, like, within the United Kingdom, Scotland is doing so much better because LGBTIQA+ is included within the curriculum and is embedded. And Ian Rivers was at the first Pride in Education conference talking about the work that they've done. I was commissioned by the Welsh Government to design 5 training workshops to support queering their archives, libraries and museums. And they've just announced that they want to ban conversion therapy, including the T, and they're looking at embedding it into the curriculum. And it's England. If we look at our history, homosexuality was a criminal offence up until 1967. It was partially decriminalised and fully decriminalised in 1982. Then 1988 comes in Section 28, which is repealed in 2003. Yes, we can get married and we have civil partnership and we're part of the Equality Act, but all of these legislations are very, very recent, between 2005 and now, and the Gender Recognition Act still hasn't been reformed. There's same-sex couples don't have same access to IVS than straight couple, etc., and so forth and so on. So what you were saying is understanding our past will enable you to understand what's happening in the present, and so that we can plan for a better future.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Yes, there's someone just...
Hi. Yeah, I was just going to say what an amazing film, and it really captured the time. So I taught in schools from the 90s to the early noughties in London, and I have to say there was a bigger spectrum of experience. So your film is set in the north. I'm not quite sure where it is. I worked in London. There was so much queer bashing, but at the same time, you know, there was a spectrum of teachers and head teachers, and you know, some of us did get support and did support some children. So I think, and also I have to say that, you know, not everyone was ostracised by their families. So there is a whole spectrum of that. So I think that there was a particular scene in the film where the 2 sisters which I thought that was one of the most shocking bits of the film, but it really does capture how families were divided and how Section 28 actually did destroy family relationships, but in that way that it was kind of hidden. But yeah, very, very moved to see this film. It's very, very well made, and I hope it stimulates lots of debate and people talking about teaching at that time and being pupils at that time. But it was very difficult to teach at that time, especially if you were gay. But I do think there was support as well if you were, in a school in Islington like me.
Yeah, no, we did, again, in our research, there was a big south-north divide, and then rural versus...
Where was it filmed?
So it's set in Newcastle. And the reason for Newcastle was that... So Manchester at the time was the gay capital. And so there was a clear south-north divide, so we knew it had to be set in the north. Like Catherine's experience was in Liverpool, Sarah Squires was in Leeds, and so it could have been Liverpool, it could have been Leeds. It was Newcastle because the director went to study in Newcastle and she had family there, so she was aware of the geography. And one thing that came up also in our research is that a lot of the teachers used to teach somewhere else, not where they live, so that they could keep this separation. And Georgia had a clear idea of, North Shields, for the ones of you who know Newcastle, and South Shields, and crossing that bridge, which was a representation of, like crossing different worlds. But so, yeah, you're right. Like there was a big difference thankfully in a way. But, we were making a drama, so we picked the one that's more dramatic.
Yeah, I don't think it was totally a north-south divide. Sorry. And I think what was amazing at that time, and taking your point about, solidarity, was that, loads of us went up to Manchester for that big march, and we marched, and, people from Manchester came to London and we all marched together. And some of us were lucky. I mean, my mother marched with me on the demonstration in London.
Yeah, and it was also, I guess, a personality thing as well. And like, for instance, Sarah decided that she had enough of hiding, and she went to one of those marches and ended up on TV. But she knew it was a risk that she wanted to take that risk. But people like Catherine, the scene where she sees Lois in the bar and the next day comes up, the student comes to find her and she basically shuts it off straight away. This is a scene that Catherine told us. We'd actually come up with it already, but then she told us a very similar scene. And so yeah, it depends on the person as well. But I guess what we were interested in is, what if you don't want to be marching? What if you just want to live a quiet life? And then what?
Could I jump in as well? I think the point you made is really valid. And I mean, I think like what Hélène did and Georgia and the whole team behind Blue Jean is incredible, but it is one story. It is one story of one person's reality. And I've had the privilege, just like you guys have had in your research, of speaking to I think I've spoken to about 20 teachers, and I've had just a complete array of different stories from people who are a bit later on in life now and deeply regret not being there for they've described scenes that still traumatize them to this day of not supporting people that came to them for support. I've got teachers who are just like, screw it, Sarah's totally out there, just taking everyone to Pride, all my students were there. And it's such a difference. And I think that's what I think the story of Section 28, why it's probably difficult for you guys to narrow down on writing one story, why I'm finding it immensely difficult to think about how to represent such an intersectional, how do I create an intersectional documentary that represents everyone's story? You can't, but I think a lot of the thing about Section 28 is it is a vehicle for tens of hundreds of thousands of millions of children's story that all experienced a part of it. And if you think that oh God, someone's already made Blue Jean, but I had an idea for a film about a teacher, you know, who's in London, in Islington. You should make it because it will be a different story. It will tell a different perspective. So I think we're really at the start. And I'm quite interested in the zeitgeist around Section 28 now, with 4 or 5 books coming out. Breach Theatre have got a great show. If you haven't heard about them, go check it out on Section 28.
Theatre's also got a show coming up about After the Act.
Yeah, more films coming out as well. And I think it's kind of interesting, actually. It's this time a bunch of people in the sort of 30s and 40s going, hang on a minute, we should be talking about this. So there are so many stories to tell around Section 28.
Also, Section 28 was repealed in 2003, but it didn't mean that overnight, all of a sudden, it was okay and it could be done in schools. And I was in I celebrated the very first LGBT History Month in February 2005, so the very first year it was there. And the amount of resistance that I had, I put 30 posters across my college and they got torn. So I was like, okay, I'll photocopy 60. They got torn. So I photocopied 90, took a ladder and put them where they couldn't be accessed. And that was just 2 years after it was repealed. And then as I progressed through the management ladder, if you will, in education, I was trying to encourage everywhere I worked to celebrate LGBT History Month. And it was a battle every time, and I'm like, hello, this is repealed. The second thing, which I think has been touched upon but not really spoken about, is the idea of normal. I am normal, I'm just not the norm, and this idea to say that we are not normal is ridiculous.
Because it's based on heteronormative, isn't it? I mean, we are normal. We are the birds and bees. We are the animals in the field and in the sea. We're completely normal. I think we've got time for one more question from the floor. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. A few comments, if I may, and then a question. I'm delighted, Sarah. I'm thrilled that you are angry. It feels to me that you feel cheated in a way that the folks with whom I was mobilising in Roads Must Fall feel cheated of a certain type of knowledge that has been missold to us and of which we've been deprived. I wonder then, how are we to teach this knowledge of Section 28? This is not knowledge. This is not LGBTQ inclusive education. This is specifically knowledge of the specific oppression that we've experienced. It seems that Section 28 is not on the national curriculum, such that, Hélène, you seem to point out that it's films, it's art that is doing this work of education. I agree, but I disagree with the person behind me. I think that when it comes to the content that we need to teach, it is not the case, I believe, that Section 28 was a matter of homophobia. It really was a matter of winning an election. And that turns us, I think, to this playbook that you mentioned. The content of the curriculum of Section 28 needs to be the playbook. And I think when we come to talk about what that playbook was in the 80s, we need to think about, Laïla, you mentioned, but we haven't really discussed in this room, black queer people. So in your film, Hélène, the representation of black queerness came across in the one-dimensional character who was there always to raise the mood. And it rather seems to me that if we're to take seriously this playbook, if we're to take seriously what happened during the 80s and why the Tories, why Margaret Thatcher wanted to win a third election, we need to engage with Margaret Thatcher at the Conservative Party's relationship with black people and black queer people. How then, this is my question for you, how in this playbook, in this content of the curriculum of Section 28, are we going to do that?
I could make some... Do you want to go first, or I can...
Yes, because I'm a teacher, I'm really passionate about this. First of all, we need to decolonize the curriculum, and we need to address the racist rhetoric that is being driven by the Tory government and I'm going to be really political, and if some people don't agree, that's fine. You have to accept this is my opinion. So if you look at historically, again, the attitude towards people from diverse culture and linguistic backgrounds, not just black and brown, but Asian and other minoritized and marginalized communities. And don't even get me started on the exclusion of disabled people and queer disabled people. It needs a complete shift, but the shift needs to start by ensuring that the curriculum is intersectional in its delivery, that it's included in every single subject. I had an argument earlier with a person who said he taught math. Are you there? The math teacher. I asked them how they embed it within the math, and they said, no, you don't. And I said, yes, you can. You can teach statistics. 3.5%, according to the national census, of the population identify as LGBT and or T. So there are ways. It's about developing skills, developing critical thinking skills, language of opinion, communication, emotional intelligence, etc., and so forth and so on, in a way that is inclusive, celebratory, and intersectional.
Could I add on? Is that okay?
And actually, on a day-to-day basis, it's also about us talking to our nephews, nieces, grandchildren, the children of the people next door, our neighbours' children, and just having open-hearted, inclusive conversations that aren't just based on we privileged whiteys. It's about incorporating that we are all together a community and not just having this isolated, that isolated. It's about communication and how we do that, and actually making that effort to communicate.
I think your point's really, really well made, actually. You know, I wanted to kind of agree with you. I mean, I think the Conservative government of the 1980s and the Conservative government of today aren't just homophobic, they're ableist, they're racist. And one of my small contribution to your thought about how we do that is in my film. Actually, we've scripted it now, and the central story and the starting story is about the Haringey lesbian gay unit. I don't know if people have heard of this or they remember it. But in the 80s, when the Greater London Council was disbanded by the Conservative government, which was run by Ken Livingstone, they did quite a lot of really good loony left work. We might call that woke now, some people might refer to in politics. They did great, fantastic work, like funding London's first lesbian and gay centre, giving lots of money out to lots of different initiatives and local authorities. All of those great people left and went into local authorities. One of them was Haringey, and that had an incredible black action group of lesbian and gay people, actually, and a centre that was based there, the first black and lesbian gay centre. And I feel it's my responsibility to centre that right at the start of the story, because what they were doing wasn't just tackling homophobia, they were tackling ableism, racism, all other isms, and saying we need to rethink our education. But the challenge that we've got now, and I had an email the other day from a woman who I interviewed who is a teacher. She said that she trains teachers now, and one of them had said to her, she's the same age as me, she's now a teacher, and said, I don't know how to teach people about this because I experienced it. I didn't see what it was like to have positive images. So we've got a real challenge, you know, as you were saying, Laila, around how we actually look at the education system of our own teachers. But it's about intersectionality. It's not just about lesbian, gay, trans.
Could I just have to introduce this point, because, you know, we're talking about the Conservative government. I'm a fully paid member of the Labour Party, but I have to say, if we're talking about racism, let's get real. There are racist, insidious, racist intellectuals who are racist. And I would say there is not one white person who has been through the educational system in our country or been through the churches that has not been programmed to be racist. So it's about taking individual responsibility and looking at ourselves. You know, we can all, you know, side with one political party or the other, but racism is absolutely inherent within white people.
So to your point, it's something that we did discuss. We were very aware of making a very white film, and we actually, before we cast Rosie, we did make offers to black actors to play the role of Jean. They passed. And for some of the other supporting roles, like the role of Viv, we did blind casting. So it wasn't a brief to cast a white person, and it came down to two people. And yes, we did end up choosing a white person. So I think that's one part of the conversation, is that we did try to what is called blind casting. The other question was, it's already a film set in 88, and Georgia and myself were not born in 88. So it's already a stretch for us as debut filmmakers to make a film about a period that we haven't known personally. Adding to this, the black experience or the non-white experience is something else that we felt we didn't have as much understanding of, and it was an extra level of complexity that we felt could muddle what we were trying to do. And also, I'm not saying muddle in terms of like confused, but I'm just in terms of like the different, it was another layer that I do think is an important one to talk about, but one that we didn't have insights into. And it was a bit scary to do that from our perspective as like, new storytellers trying to just... So we kind of felt like we wanted to tackle this one thing from a point of view that we could relate to, in a culture that we could relate to more directly, because there was already this gap between our experience and what we were talking about. So we also felt that if we did end up casting someone who was not white, then we'd need to do another huge amount of work on the story to be truthful to this experience, and that would maybe change kind of like the focus of what we wanted to do. So I mean, this is just what happened. Like, I'm not saying this is the best way. I'm just saying this is kind of like one of the reasons that and then we ended up finding Rosie and Viv, who just happened to be the best actors for the job. And we tried not to put race too much into it. I am fully aware of the lack of representation in the film, and I'm not saying that, but it's also Newcastle in the 80s. And in terms of authenticity to the time, that's like kind of what in the research that we found, So it's a complex issue, I guess, and I'm happy to chat more about it. But yeah, that's just wanted to give you an insight on like the decision process.
Nothing about us without us. So if you're looking at making something intersectional, make sure that at the table you've got the black, the queers, the disabled, the marginalized and minoritized voices that can actually represent their community. So if the film is entirely, or the documentary is entirely made by white people, they'll only have that perspective. Nothing about us without us.
Yeah, and we did have behind the camera, which I know you don't see in the camera, behind the camera we did have, like people from, we did try to have like as much diversity as we could. But like what Sarah was saying, this is just one person's story. And in a documentary you can represent everything. In a film it's slightly more difficult. That said, like I do believe in intersectionality, and I think it's important. I don't think we did particularly well in our film. So yeah.
Importantly, Hélène, I'm not talking about the two lead characters. I'm talking about the supporting character, and the way in which her story was one-dimensional, and the way in which her story was to provide levity.
But that's, again, that was down to blind casting, because that character wasn't written as, none of the supporting characters were written as from a particular minority. It was just, we went out to, they were written out as queer people, and we went out to every LGBTQ plus person that we could target, basically, that we could reach out to, and then we just picked the people who had that kind of energy that the characters were written as. Ace just happened to be mixed race.
Shall we go to the bar?
Yes, actually, I think I'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you.